Welcome to today's webinar on mediation and emotional intelligence. I'm delighted to hand over now to mediators David Liddell and Becky Dacuna, who will be leading the webinar.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So my name is David Liddell. Great to have you here for today's webinar. It's proven to be one of the most popular of our series of webinars to date, and I guess for a very good reason. I think when I am working with difficult disputes and conflicts, and I'm talking to the parties during the mediation process, I often say to the party, what could the organisation have done differently? What could your managers have done differently? And what people often say to me is just for someone to have sat down and listened to me, to have given me an opportunity to talk about my concerns, to talk about the issues from my point of view, to listen to me and not to judge me, to empathise with me and just give me some space to talk. And this feedback I've been receiving now has been consistent over the last 10 years of working with organisations to help resolve disputes and conflicts. And it's become really clear to me that when we don't give the parties an opportunity to talk about their emotions and their feelings and the impact of the conflict, managers and leaders and others are missing a fantastic opportunity to help resolve the dispute and create constructive and lasting remedies. And of course, as mediators, the central tenet of dispute resolution is giving the parties a chance to explore their feelings and their emotions and to express them to each other in a safe and constructive environment with the help of the mediator, and then to explore a series of remedies. So the webinar today is going to look at the role of the mediator and how we use the skills and the competencies of emotional intelligence, how we apply emotional intelligence within our practice as mediators, and how we give the parties a chance for them to develop their emotional intelligence. So the purpose of today then is to explore the meaning of emotional intelligence and to look at how it works within and also outside of the mediation process. And I love that photo, the steam coming out of his ears, the anger, and people have very different views of emotions. But when I talk to the parties in the dispute, or more importantly the managers who are often responsible for conflict resolution in their teams, they hold views of emotions as being damaging and destructive, harmful, negative, nasty, unpleasant, that they will destroy the relationship. It's incredible. People are scared of working with strong emotions. And as a result of that view, we don't harness the potential. And emotional intelligence gives us an opportunity to harness the potential of the emotions that exist when we're in conflict. So we'll look today at emotional intelligence and understand what we mean by this term. And there are different theories and understandings. Of course, we'll refer to Daniel Goleman, the most recent and probably the most well-known writer on emotional intelligence. We'll look at the 5 strands and elements of emotional intelligence and how we apply those in our mediation practice. We'll look at how mediators apply emotional intelligence within our work to secure constructive and lasting outcomes. And of course, for those of you who've been on my previous webinars, you will know that I'm really passionate about taking what we do as mediators and applying it into leadership and management best practice. So I will be looking at how we as mediators can inform and develop leadership practice so our leaders can be better equipped at using EI skills to secure outcomes to disputes without needing to bring in an external mediator. We'll look at a really important question for us here at TCM, and I know for other mediators, and it's this question: does the mediation process develop emotional intelligence skills and competencies for the parties? I'd like to explore that with you a little bit today and look at the mediation process, therefore, through the lens of not just being a process of dispute resolution, but a process of learning and an opportunity to gain insight and awareness that will have, I personally believe, a long-run benefit for those individuals. We'll look at some of the benefits and some of the limitations of emotional intelligence. And I'm really excited today that we have Becky Dacuna with us. And then if you've been on previous webinars, you'll know Becky's joined us to provide a mediator's perspective. And today Becky's going to be providing a perspective of how mediators use emotional intelligence in their work. So I'm really delighted Becky's here with us today. So there are different definitions of emotional intelligence, and I think one of the things that's become clear to me as I've been studying this for many years is there's no one clear, hard and fast understanding of what we mean by emotional intelligence. But James Manklow, the founder of mindtools.com, describes emotional intelligence as the ability to recognize our emotions, to understand what they're telling us, and this is absolutely key. We know in mediation and from our work as mediators that what our emotions are telling us often is that we're not having our needs met, and that's given us a sense of loss, which drives our emotions. So we know the emotion is the symptom of a loss or an unmet need, and we work as mediators to help the parties codify that and convey that to us. To realize how our emotions are impacting others around us, and again, those of you who've experienced conflicts and are mediators will know that we can become very blinkered, very self-centered, we lose the bigger picture when we're in conflict. There are psychological, emotional reasons for that. The emotional intelligence is the ability to look beyond ourselves at the impact on others. It involves our perception of others and our recognition of the effect on others. The ability to be empathic, and again, if you've heard me speak previously, you'll know that I believe there's an empathy deficit in many of our organisations. But emotional intelligence provides an opportunity to develop empathic conversations, and for me, it's one of the most important threads of emotional intelligence. To understand how people feel, and then using that empathy to actually manage those relationships more effectively. So the argument here isn't that emotional intelligence is a nice to have in terms of our role as mediators, managers or leaders. It's actually a critical element of the psychological contract, and it's a fundamental function of effective and modern leadership. But we're not taught this in our business schools, in our management classes, and I believe it's a significant factor and a reason why we experience it, the grievance cultures and the conflict cultures that we see. So there are 5 strands and elements to emotional intelligence that I think are worth reflecting on for a moment now. So people with high levels of emotional intelligence tend to be very self-aware. As mediators, when we're working with training new mediators, when we're working with mediators who are developing their professional practices, we always go back to it starts with me as a mediator. Being aware of my own responses to conflict, my own attitudes to conflict, being aware of how I feel, how I react. And when we're training mediators, we'll often start with looking at our own experience of conflict and draw learning and insights from those that we can bring to the mediation environment. So mediators demonstrate their emotional intelligence through a high level of self-awareness, and in doing so, that leads to a level of self-regulation, which mediators demonstrate through their impartiality and their objectivity, the non-partisanship that, if you like, drives and is a key foundation of the mediator's role. We're not there to take sides, we're not there to judge, we're not there to blame, we don't tell the parties what they should or shouldn't do, we don't wag a finger, we don't tut, we don't use administrative or bureaucratic processes to seek a resolution, we don't take sides. What we do is we create the conditions for dialogue, to give the parties a chance to talk and to listen. And I believe that self-regulation for the mediator that we use in mediation is absolutely key to giving the parties a sense of being able to talk in a safe and open and honest way with one another. When we're training managers and leaders and others in organisations, it never ceases to amaze me how easily people get hooked into the emotions, how managers respond defensively to criticisms that they might receive, and that defensive response can often come through as an emotional response. And in doing so, not only does it impact or negate the relationship with the employee, it actually is an antecedent to conflict, and it's an opportunity missed for the two parties, the manager and the employee, to build a stronger relationship. So self-regulation is important, not just for us as mediators, but us as leaders and managers. People who possess emotional intelligence skills focus not just on the immediate impact or the immediate return, if you like, the immediate return on investment. And the way that we describe this in mediation terms is we look at long-term constructive remedies to disputes and conflicts. So the mediator isn't just concerned about fixing the problems now, today. What we think about in mediation is how will you resolve your problems when you experience bumps in the road in the future. So let me explain. we know that in our mediation work that the parties will reach some form of an understanding, some kind of an action plan. We also know that the organisation, the team, the department will be subject to future change. There will be bumps in the road, there will be problems, there will be the potential for conflicts ahead. And mediators don't possess a canister of Teflon that we can spray the parties with and they're suddenly going to be conflict-free zones. That's not the case. The parties will experience conflict again. So how do we then build a level of emotional intelligence within the parties that motivates them to resolve future conflicts and disputes in a more constructive and more effective way as a result of having gone through the mediation process? So not only do we as mediators bring a level of self-motivation, we actually encourage a level of motivation, a degree of emotional intelligence within the parties who experience mediation. So empathy is absolutely key. Our fair mediation model: facilitate, appreciate, innovate, resolve. So the appreciate is about developing empathic relationships between the parties. The ability for the mediator to really understand and identify what the parties' wants and needs are and what their viewpoint is. And the mediator encourages empathy not just between themselves and the parties, but also between the parties themselves. And a question we'll often ask the parties as mediators is, how do you think the other person feels right now, being here in the mediation process? And I can count on one hand how many times people have said to me they don't care. What parties often say to me is, do you know something, I haven't thought about that. And I'll say to them, well, what a great opportunity for you here today at mediation to think about it. So how do you think the other person might be feeling today? Well, I don't know, probably fed up, frustrated, probably much like I am. And what the mediator does is we unlock the ability for the parties to be empathic. And in doing so, we start to forge a level of empathic dialogue and compassionate communication between the parties, which is lost in organisations when the parties are relying on formal processes which in essence negate or act as a barrier to empathic dialogue. The fifth element is perhaps it's worthy of note. I'm not sure how relevant it is to our mediation process. What I do know is those of you out there who are mediators, we do know how to have a good party. So at TCM we had our summer day out in Brighton last week. So maybe we were examining offering our social skills in that way. But I think mediators, they are role models. I think leaders who offer mediation skills are role models, and I think the ability to act as a role model to others where people connect with you, they aspire to you, they are inspired by you, is an important element of leadership. And I also think it's an important element of mediation. And one place I think that can be really important in our mediation work is when the parties reach an impasse and feel really stuck. They don't know the way through this, they feel they're going round in circles. And the mediator steps back from that, and instead of framing their response in a, yes, we are going round in circles, I don't know how to resolve this, either, what the mediator says is, we're making great progress today. Let me summarise the progress that we've made today. And actually, you know something, being stuck in an impasse, that's perfectly normal and perfectly natural. And what the mediator does is normalises the difficulties that the parties are having. And by being positive, optimistic, offering some future insight on an opportunity to resolve the situation in the future, that can actually build a strong mindset for the parties. So I think that's an important strand to our mediation work. So why are we seeing mediation being used so much? Why is mediation increasing so rapidly as the favoured mechanism for resolving disputes? Emotions are the elephant in the room. I can't understand as a mediator why our organisations are so ill-equipped at having difficult conversations which have emotional or content within them. I think there are good reasons. I think our organisational policies and procedures don't allow for those conversations to happen, and you'll have heard me speak, I'm sure, in the past about why we need to modify our grievance processes to create resolution procedures within our organisations which promote empathic and emotionally intelligent conversations. I think managers are scared or nervous about having conversations that involve strong emotions. They're not equipped to respond. They don't have the confidence, the competence, or the capability to react to high levels of emotion. They're fearful about saying or doing the wrong thing, and as a result of that, they might end up in a disciplinary process themselves, or worse still, at an employment tribunal. So those opportunities to have a conversation, a natural, normal, everyday conversation where one person says to the other person, how do you feel, those opportunities are lost. And that is the elephant in the room, and that's what we address every day as mediators. So there's our elephant in our office, the feelings. So how do we address these emotions? What do we do with the elephant in the room? Well, throughout the conversation, we are mindful of our own responses and our reactions to the situation, to the strong emotions. We're avoiding being hooked in by parties, by responding to the emotions, by acting in a defensive or judgmental or partisan way. We listen to the parties. I always like to think of the mediator giving the parties a jolly good listening to. We don't judge, as I've said. We're not there to blame. We listen actively. We do ask, and this is a really important message for mediators, we ask very, very challenging questions. And when I'm training HR professionals who do investigations or grievance case management, they often say to me, oh, gosh, I wish I could ask those questions in the investigation process. And in actual fact, paradoxically, when you're trying to establish facts or truth through an investigation or a formal process, you often have to be quite guarded or careful in the way questions are framed. For me as a mediator, I can ask whatever questions I like. I'm professionally curious, I'm intrigued, I want to understand the conflict, and I want to get to root cause. I'm never there to blame or to judge the parties, and that's a really key message. I can ask far more powerful questions as a mediator. The mediator creates the conditions for dialogue. We know, and psychologists tell us, that the lack of control, the loss of a future is deeply stressful and a cause of anxiety for the parties in a dispute. The fight or flight response, the amygdala, as Daniel Goleman tells us through his writings, is causing us to have a very stressful emotional response to the conflict. That can be a major barrier to the parties coming together. The mediator establishes clear ground rules, creates a safe space for the parties to talk and to listen to each other. We ask the parties not to interrupt one another where possible. We invite the parties to listen actively, to ask open and honest questions of each other, to be open and honest with each other. And we break down that attack and counter-attack mentality that the parties have found themselves in, and we create the conditions, a safe space for the parties to talk. So once we've created the safety and the space for the parties to talk, then we can facilitate and develop those compassionate, empathic conversations. Someone asked before the webinar, what's the differences between facilitation and mediation? So thanks for that question. For me, the mediator uses facilitation techniques in their mediation work. It's simply to make this difficult conversation easier. Giving the parties a chance to talk and to listen, we use our reframing skills to identify, help the parties to shift away from the negative or the destructive language. We're summarizing, paraphrasing, reframing. For us, we're using a variety of skills to move the process forward, always with a view that the parties own the content of the dispute. The mediator is managing the process of the dispute resolution. Critically, in managing and identifying the elephant in the room, the mediator names and validates strong emotions. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be frustrated. You feel fed up, betrayed, let down. You know, those feelings are perfectly natural and perfectly normal. Who wouldn't feel those things when we're in conflict? The difference between people who aren't in a mediation process and those people who are in a mediation process is those people who are in a mediation feel exactly the same way as anyone else, but they've shown the courage and the determination to give those feelings and those emotions an airing, to listen to the other person and to try and find a way forward. But as mediators, it's critical that we name and validate the strong emotions and begin to normalize those. And finally, how do we address the elephant in the room? Is we empower the parties to reach their own solutions. I believe passionately that in any dispute, the parties know how to resolve it. I can't think, in fact, it's a complete anathema to me, of how a third party of any capacity or any professionalism can help me to resolve a dispute with another person. I know how to resolve my own disputes. I'm just not being given the the skills or the process by which to do that. But I know what I need to do to be able to resolve it. The mediator's role is to help the parties explore what it is that needs to happen to resolve the dispute. And the beauty of mediation is those resolutions are so simple, they're so humane and straightforward. They don't have to be codified in complex legal terms. You know, going for a coffee with each other, talking to each other, avoiding emailing each other when we're feeling fed up and angry or tired, or, you know, the simple measures that the parties know they can do and implement. So a couple of final thoughts before we move into the Q&A session. So how does mediation develop emotional intelligence for the parties in a particular situation? Well, it gives the parties a chance to hear what's being really said by each other. Not to form a viewpoint or a perception, but to hear what's really said. And what happens in so many mediation cases, those of you who are mediating I'm sure will recognise this, is the party will say, but if I'd have known that, I wouldn't have sent you that email. If I'd have known that, I wouldn't have spoken to you like that. If I'd have known that, I'd have been a bit more flexible with you, or I'd have been a bit more supportive. If I'd have known that, if I'd have known that, if I'd have known that. You didn't know that. The question isn't, you know, or blaming people for not having known it. The question now for us as mediators is, now you have that insight and that knowledge, what will you do differently tomorrow? So the emotional intelligence leads to behavioural change and learning and insights that will benefit the parties not just in the immediate impact of the dispute resolution, but actually over the long term. It gives the parties a chance to reflect and consider. When we're in conflict, and if any of you can think about a conflict you've been involved in, we can often run at 100 miles per hour at the conflict, or we duck and we hide away. We avoid dealing with it. What mediation does, it gives the parties a chance in a non-confrontational environment to reflect and consider the conflict and their behaviours. It builds the empathy and appreciation, and that has a long-run benefit for the parties. It builds that understanding and insight, as I've mentioned, and it drives real change, not just short-term change, but long-term changes that are defined by the parties and are characterised by what the parties' needs and interests are, not the imposition of a third party who I've already expressed I don't believe are the best people to resolve our disputes. So mediation offers a chance to stop, to listen, and to learn. So that's the end of the, if you like, my input into the webinar, and I'm delighted to introduce, I'm sure many of you will know her, Becky DeCuna, who's the Director of Resolution Services here at the TCM Group. Becky's been with the business for 4 years, I think now, Becky, and manages our team of mediators and trainers. She's an active mediator and trainer working here in the UK and also on a global basis. And this is an opportunity for Becky to provide a practitioner's perspective of emotional intelligence. And there she is.
Hi everyone.
Becky, before we ask any of the questions, do you have any sort of reflections on anything that you've heard, or is there any thoughts or reflections on emotional intelligence and why you think it's important for mediators?
I think it's the most important attribute that, or set of attributes that a mediator needs to possess and develops more through their practice as a mediator. It's absolutely key, and we always advise organisations when they're recruiting and selecting mediators that they look for aptitudes in this area, that they look for self-awareness, that they look for the ability to manage emotion in others as well as in themselves. So absolutely, it's our currency in many ways as mediators.
Thanks, Becky. I mean, some people believe that IQ is more important than emotional intelligence. As mediators, we know that emotions do play a key part in creating and also resolving disputes. And what's your thought in terms of that tension between IQ, intelligence quotient, and emotional intelligence?
I mean, in some ways, I think there's a false dichotomy in there, because I don't think that I think without emotional intelligence and the ability to work with emotions in ourselves and in others, we're not able to do some of the things people associate, I guess, with other forms of kind of cognitive intelligence. We're not able to problem solve, to make good decisions, if we're not able to manage our own emotions. So, and there's lots of there's lots of examples out there of most that indicate that most kind of truly successful or effective people, in particular managers and leaders, have high levels of emotional intelligence as well as traditional intelligence or technical expertise. And often that's why we're often called in to train managers in mediation skills, because it's recognised that these managers could be brilliant in their technical areas, but without the ability to take people with them, to build effective relationships, they're not going to get anywhere. And the reason that I think people succeed in whatever job they're in, whether it's sales or manufacturing or mediation, is that if they have high levels of emotional intelligence, is that people want to work with them, they want to help those people, they want to listen to them, they're influenced by them. And I suppose the final thing I'd say on that is that the mediation process is very much designed to enable people to be able to get into good problem-solving mode. And our belief that, and experience as mediators, is that really strong emotions get in the way of good problem-solving. So we designed our fair mediation process around that. We enable people to work with their emotions, to understand them, to vent, etc., and understand each other's emotions before we ask them to do kind of the problem-solving bit, and it enables that.
Thank you. So I'm fascinating. So there's not a dichotomy between the two. Traditional intelligence, the knowledge of our roles, is absolutely key to be able to do our job. But in actual fact, the emotional intelligence is a key element of being a manager. The two work hand in glove in terms of problem solving and managing others. I think that's a really interesting way to put it. And I think the challenge for organisations is, do our organisations value emotional intelligence as much as we do to sort of traditional knowledge and skills and competencies around doing the job? I think that's a really powerful message, so thank you for that, Becky. The second question is really thinking about how the role of the mediator, and thinking about the emotional intelligence skills that mediators might use on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think it's a part of our training when we train mediators is to, as I said earlier, we select. We advise organisations to select people who have an aptitude or have got some good emotional intelligence already, and then we develop those skills. And our big belief is that you can develop emotional intelligence through training, support, coaching, mentoring, etc. So and that will include mediators are able. It's useful skills for mediators because they're able to manage themselves in a mediation. They're dealing with tough scenarios, they're hearing a lot of difficult things that could trigger all kinds of emotional responses in them, and as mediators we have to be able to manage that, to stay calm, to stay professional, to stay focused, even if we've got that turmoil going on. So we have the self-awareness, and then we regulate those emotions, as you talked about earlier, David. And then we focus, because of that we're able to focus on the others in the room, so the parties in the mediation. We're able to empathise, we're able to help parties to talk to each other and to us, and to listen to each other. So they're essential skills for mediators.
Thanks, Becky. Do you remember, Becky, the mediation that you and I did, where the two parties really weren't able to listen to each other, they weren't able to hear each other? And I remember one of the things that you brought as a mediator, you invited the parties to summarise back to each other what they were hearing the other one saying. And they found that a really difficult thing to do in the first instance, because it felt quite unnatural. They wanted to interrupt each other, they wanted to give their viewpoint. But by slowing it down and inviting them to summarise back to each other, what I witnessed, and it was so powerful in that mediation, was it started off by summarising, and then it started to demonstrate a level of empathy. And the more they summarised and empathised, the more they got what each other was saying.
Yeah.
And that was, for me, was a really great example of how a mediator broke that cycle of, if you like, dispute or discord or between those parties. It was very powerful.
Absolutely, and I think that then led, that empathy in the other parties led to the ability for them to listen to each other, as you say, and then in turn it was a bit of a cycle in some ways, because that then led to the basics of emotional intelligence, of that ability to then develop self-awareness, and maybe the cycle continues. They could then self-regulate their own emotions because of that.
Thank you, Becky. So mediators are very concerned about their own continuing professional development, and I think that's a fantastic attribute of our growing profession as mediators. What advice might you have for mediators around how they could develop and refine their emotional intelligence skills?
Well, I think every time that we mediate, we develop our emotional intelligence skills. It'd be impossible not to. That's one of the beauties of mediation. We're continually learning. And I think that's because every time we mediate, we learn more of ourselves. We learn more about how we react in those challenging situations. What emotions are we feeling? What are we having to manage in ourselves? What we talk about triggers in mediation, or when we're training mediators, of what are the buttons that people could push that will cause us to have an emotional reaction. So we learn more of those each time. And then we also, of course, learn about others. We learn the different ways that people show emotions. We spot the signs that someone's feeling strong emotions, and then we learn to respond to those and to diffuse those strong emotions so that parties can learn to communicate more effectively when they're feeling emotional. And I suppose in terms of top tips, what I'd say is I think it's crucial that mediators develop reflective practice. So after a mediation, for them to work out whether it's a solitary activity or with a co-mediator if they've co-mediated, or with a manager or a supervisor, a buddy, for them to actually critique what went on then. What were the points when I felt emotion? When was I triggered? How did I handle it? What will I do differently? How am I going to develop my competence around emotion, how I manage emotions? And to get feedback from the other person as well, if we've co-mediated in particular. We always have blind spots, and emotional intelligence in many ways is that the ability, part of that self-awareness that's at the heart of it, is about being willing to seek honest feedback and to take it on board. So asking the person, what are my blind spots, how did I handle that, and where can I develop?
Fantastic, and really building up that sort of self-motivation, that self-regulation, that's so important.
Yeah.
And I think to the argument I'm hearing you say there, Becky, is you never stop learning. You can never say you're an emotionally intelligent mediator. You were constantly working towards improving and enhancing our emotional intelligence, and it's a constant journey of discovery and development.
Absolutely, and actually one word that quite often comes up in emotional intelligence literature is humility. It's not saying to say that we don't know what we're good at, but we also we have a realistic view of ourselves. We know where we need to develop, and the more as mediators we can develop that willingness to look honestly at ourselves and know where we need to develop, the more we'll continually improve. And the other thing I'd say, I guess, to help that process, as well as debriefing, supervision, etc., and reflecting post-mediation, is to find opportunities for CPD, continuing professional development, find opportunities for workshops, whether it's through our PMA or in-house offerings.
Thanks, Becky. Of course, the PMA is the Professional Mediators Association, which is the trade body for workplace and employment mediators. So thanks for that. I think we've examined some of this through the webinar, but it'd be great to hear any thoughts or reflections about the mediation process, and look at it from the perspective of the parties rather than the mediator, and any kind of thoughts you've had or experience you've had of where mediation has developed emotional intelligence skills or competences for the parties in a particular dispute.
Yeah, I think this is actually probably the reason that I was most attracted to mediation, actually, is the transformative element of mediation, that parties cannot help but learn a lot about themselves through the process. I think it's impossible for any party who really enters into the spirit of mediation, it's impossible to leave a mediation unchanged in some way. So I'd say it's the best way to learn about yourself and others, to enter into a mediation for the parties. It's and everything that you've said, David, in this webinar so far, is it's a supported, safe forum and space for parties to, with the help of a facilitator who will ask good questions, coach, support, for parties to learn, I guess, to express, to understand, notice and express their emotions, but also to hear and understand the other person's emotions. And if I could give a bit of an example, this week one of our mediators mediated a really difficult case which was looking like it was going to be one of those very hard to resolve cases where both parties actually said to him in the morning in the individual meetings, so private confidential meetings, that they were wanting to leave the organisation they were working for. And as a result of the mediation, they both left really remotivated. They'd had a chance to talk about their difficult emotions. They'd learned about the other person's emotions and the reason for them, and they both left motivated to stay. So it was a great example of motivation, as you said earlier, David, is one of the 5 kind of attributes in Daniel Goleman's model, mixed model of emotional intelligence. It's one of the expressions, I guess, or elements of emotional intelligence, that productivity and motivation.
I think it's fantastic. It makes mediation so rich and so powerful, and that transformative effect of mediation, and how that links to transformational leadership, effective leadership. And you introduced the word coach in there as well. And for those of you who will know TISO and know ourselves, we're really passionate about the role and impact of conflict coaching. And we're doing more and more work to promote that area of activity alongside our mediation services, to provide coaching and leadership and support to leaders and managers to help them get better outcomes at times of conflict, change, controversy, crisis, and really build the skills and the confidence of our managers and leaders. And I see direct parallels between coaching and mediation and getting better outcomes and building emotionally intelligent and emotionally resilient teams and workforces.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put the final few, because there's a lot of questions, and the conversation could go on forever. It's such a fascinating area. But what I'd like to explore with you, Becky, is a little bit about some of the benefits of mediation. Perhaps another question is, how can organisations, and what can organisations do to enhance emotional intelligence in the organisation? So why do it, and how can we do it?
Lovely. So just briefly on the first question, because I think you've answered that to a point in terms of the long-term benefits around resilience. But I'd say that the key benefits or long-term benefits of emotional intelligence for parties in a mediation are that they learn through the mediation process to listen and to understand each other and others, rather than to judge or to stereotype. They come with a lot of assumptions that are often found to be wrong, misperceptions that are cleared up, and they take that back to the workplace. They view others in a different way. They've learned to self-evaluate their own weaknesses or areas that they need to develop. They've learned to control a bit their own emotions in the mediation environment and to understand the root cause of them. And they've been helped to, as you said earlier, David, to take responsibility for their own actions, which is crucial. They empathise, understand the impact of their behaviours and emotions on other people, and take responsibility for that. So those are kind of, I'd say, some key benefits that people take in the long term to their relationships back at work. And in terms of what organisations can do, I think it links in a little bit actually to the 8th question here, the final question around how can managers and business leaders develop emotional intelligence, and how can they apply emotional intelligence within their teams and organisations. So it's all right with you, I'll take both kind of together. And as a manager myself, I found that the mediation training I had 12 years ago has been the most useful training that I could ever have had as a manager and leader. And I say that hand on heart, I found it invaluable. For me, being able, for managers need to be able and willing to check how people are feeling, to notice when they're feeling sad or angry or frustrated or resentful, to notice that and to explore it, to get to the reasons why someone they're managing is experiencing that and what they might need. And also for managers to be able to seek feedback from those that they manage, to create a forum for that where people in their teams and their organisations can be honest and open with their managers and with their peers. The more we can build those forums, the more we will be developing a language around emotions within our organisations. So those would be kind of my some of my musings on that.
Becky, thank you. I think you've covered most of the questions. I think the final question really is, we've all been in mediation process, I guess, where you're listening to the parties, talking to each other, and they're really struggling. They are struggling. They're struggling to empathise. They're struggling to listen to each other. They're really struggling to engage with each other's narrative or each other's truth. And of course, there's a wonderful moment in mediation. It normally happens about 12 minutes past 3 on the afternoon of a mediation where one of the parties looks up at the other one and says, but you don't understand just how bad it's been. And then the conversation starts, and you get that magical moment in mediation. I think that's that magical moment that I know I love, and I know many mediators love as well. What do you think is helpful? Sorry, what attributes do you think are helpful for parties to bring into a mediation process to help them secure, if you like, to get a better outcome in mediation, to really get the real value that mediation can offer? What can people bring to the process themselves as parties?
I'd say that, in a word, the most important thing they can bring is openness. I think if a party is open to what they may hear or feel or experience or learn, then we can work magic in the mediation room. They need to be willing to give it a try and open to what could happen. And so what we do is we enable that process as mediators, and our TCM process is that we would, through initial contact from the mediator, where we send out a questionnaire to enable them to reflect on what they want to get out of the mediation, but also what they're willing to do and what they're willing to give. So we start that reflection from then right through to the individual meetings with the parties, and I guess the more they're willing to be open, the more they're willing to look honestly at themselves as well as be honest with the other person, the more they'll get out of it. And just one final thought links into what you were saying before, David, about conflict coaching, is that I think that the only times where, or the rare times where mediation doesn't work, I would say it's often because there is a complete lack of emotional intelligence, which you don't often find, but occasionally, unfortunately, you do. Someone might not have any self-awareness or empathy. Those are the two key things that without any of that, it's difficult to mediate effectively. So that's where I would advise listeners, participants in this webinar, to consider a holistic approach that includes some conflict coaching maybe beforehand, to work with the party to think about what might their behaviours be that they could work on, what might they hear, how are they going to handle that.
Thank you so much, Becky. I think that's been absolutely fascinating. It's always good to talk with you about these things and to get a practitioner's perspective. And I hope that's been useful to yourselves to hear Becky talk. And of course, you can always hear us talk more about mediation. We love, as those of you who know us, we love mediating, but when we can't mediate, we love going on webinars and talking about mediation. So we're doing more and more of these webinars and seminars. We've got workshops running across the country for all corners of the UK. We're running sessions, free seminars, so many webinars now. So if you are interested, if this has caught your imagination, you'd be very, very welcome to join us on any future sessions. And I have been given the dates of them somewhere. I've got some resources here that may be useful for you if you're interested in doing some further reading. Of course, Daniel Goleman's book, the Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ. The Eighth Habit, a great book by Stephen Covey, very powerful reflection in terms of how we can, for leadership, how we can move from effectiveness to greatness. A document I wrote for Financier magazine called The Emotionally Intelligent Mediator, that's available. The New Psychology of Leadership, an excellent book. This was one of the shortlisted books of the Chartered Management Institute's Book of the Year by Alexander Haslam. If you're interested in the psychology of leadership, then well worth a read. Another task here, the conversation with Professor Riskin. This is from mediate.com, and it's in two pieces. And this is about mindfulness and how we as mediators can be mindful in our work. And then finally, the Emotional Competence Framework is a kind of diagnostic tool to assess your levels of emotional intelligence. These are all hyperlinks, and of course the webinar that will be sent to everybody. It's also been recorded. For me, one of the terms that misses from the emotional intelligence literature, but for me it's one of the most powerful outcomes of mediation and the parties derive the greatest value from, is a word that I think is misunderstood, more misunderstood than empathy, and it's forgiveness. And for me, when we experience a mediation process, a powerful mediation process, for me one of the most transformative effects of mediation is the ability for the parties to forgive each other for their wrongs, for the conflicts, for the challenges that have occurred. And in doing so, to be able to go back to work, and in some respects, to start with a fresh sheet. It can never be a completely fresh sheet, and you can never undo harm that's been caused. But when we have an openness and a willingness to engage with each other on an empathic level, on the level that we've been talking about today, and we're willing to forgive the other person the harm that they've caused us because we're willing to move on, that has a profound and transformative effect. And my final thoughts in terms of emotional intelligence are, and I think, as I said, it's not referenced, is that it leads to a level of forgiveness. And I think empathy and forgiveness are absolutely key to effective relationships and a critical part of the psychological contract. I will be exploring the psychological contract in more detail in a future webinar. A couple of dates for your diary if you're interested then. So the 22nd of August, I'm running a webinar called An Introduction to Mediation. This is a webinar that's written for skeptics, cynics, doubters, anybody who thinks that mediation is a bit of pink and fluffy rubbish or nonsense and it would never work in your organisation. This is the webinar for them. Half an hour of getting some really good quality information to understand what mediation is, how it works, why it works, using a no-nonsense approach to mediation. If you're a cynic, a doubter, or a skeptic, this is the place for you. That's the 22nd of August, so I'm sure you might have one or two of those in your organisations. If they've got half an hour over lunch, they'd be very, very welcome to join me on the 22nd of August. And the 19th of September is looking at the mediation and the psychological contract, the unwritten rules that tie us together. We focus in dispute resolution so much on the employment contract. Everything in our organisations is geared to protecting or mitigating risk in relation to employment contract. The psychological contract for me is so much more important than the employment contract, but it's just not talked about. We don't understand it, we don't discuss it, we don't get a sense of how to forge it and how to maintain it and how to fix it when it breaks. We then turn to the written contract. When we reach the employment contract, it's often too late. So on the 19th of September, I'll be exploring how organisations can use mediation skills to forge strong psychological contracts and to help maintain those relationships in the workplace. So thank you again for listening and for participating. Sorry there's not been the normal chance for questions and answers from yourselves, but I thought Becky coming in and sharing her thoughts would be helpful. I'm always available to take questions by email, and like I said, it's being recorded and we'll send this out to you. And thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day, and hope that you've gained something valuable from this session. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.